What's up, everybody? It's your boy Kentario, and I'm back again for another episode of Christ and Comic Books. And today we are going to be talking about the movie Book of Clarence. And outright, I can tell you that this movie is the worst movie I have ever seen in my life.
What did he say?
Now, it's not because there were just badly acted scenes, the actors weren't doing their job, the music's not hitting. It wasn't any type of issue like that, but my issue with it, and arguably several other Christians, this being the issue, is the way in which they play on the scriptures, the way in which they try to incorporate the gospel of Jesus. One of the things I want to make very evident here, it's not like I just went and watched the movie and felt all of these things. When you find out the creator's perspective on stuff like this, it tends to influence how you see things. And we're going to get into that here later on as I get into why this movie frustrated me so much. And just so everyone knows, the creator, or the director of this movie is a man by the name of James Samuel, and he is also it was also co-produced by Jay-Z as well.
No, God!
Now, I don't utilize the fact that Jay-Z is involved as a sign for this movie resulting in the way that it did. It is what people say and what people do that reveals these things more than anything. Now, also to give some background, what moved me to actually watch this video or watch this movie was that I saw a TikTok from someone who I highly respected. I really enjoyed his content, and several years ago, or maybe about 1 year ago, I asked the same gentleman if he rocked with Jesus, and his response was yes, that he does rock with Jesus. But then I saw his TikTok video talking about the movie of the Book of Clarence, and one of the things that he said is that some Christians are mad because there's a black Jesus. And I thought that was an extremely ignorant statement to have made, and before coming back to refute everything that he was saying in regards to that, I had to watch the movie first. And after watching the movie, I left very angry. Now, to give you a synopsis, a young man by the name of Clarence is a young man that has taken up selling weed in order to make money and to provide for himself and for his mother. And not only that, did he even take out a huge loan from, I guess you could say,
Start slow. That's okay.
A gangster or a mob boss living here, I guess you could say in Jerusalem. But went to this person for a loan. That loan ended up falling through, and even lost the loan that he had received, which was a carriage and a horse. And so now he has to pay this back within 30 days. And he doesn't have a lot of time to do so. And so what he ends up trying to do is come up with a plan to make that money. Long story short, he goes from considering, hey, well, I see that the disciples and Jesus make a lot of money from the miracles that they keep performing. Well, why don't I become an apostle of Jesus and be protected by him? The gangsters won't mess with Jesus, right? Well, that didn't pan out. And because of even continued jealousy and frustration, does he then shift to being, well, I will become a Messiah myself. And instead of actually performing miracles, he fakes miracles and gets a lot of people to give him money. This results, of course, in him seeing the impact of his false performance, leading him to want to, in some sense, do the right thing and in certain moments start giving back. But this leads to the Romans needing to take in and charge all those that are either fake Messiah or claiming to be Messiah. And so Clarence was one of those people. And so this is the narrative of this movie. And because I don't care for spoilers, again, I'm telling you guys, I'm so sorry. I hate this movie so much. I would not recommend it to Christians. I will tell you, they incorporate him going through a crucifixion and being resurrected. Yeah, we'll get into that near the end. So just stick with me. But that is the synopsis of the movie. I'm sorry y'all seeing me rub my nose once. And so here are actually some of the things that I liked about the movie. And to make it point blank and simple, what I would have liked from this movie, or what would have made me enjoy the movie more, is if they just didn't have the biblical narrative incorporated within it.
What do you mean by that?
There are subtle ways to communicate biblical messages, yes, but to incorporate biblical moments and Jesus and his disciples and try to have them have some type of relationship and interaction with Clarence on a deeper level in the way that they did, really took away from the movie, but the overall messaging that they were doing and the experiences of Clarence's life, his relationship with his brother, him having these issues with mobsters, him then being this, or gangsters, him then becoming this person that is shifting the perspective of these gangsters, even though he is doing it in a shiesty way, it leading to it costing him his life, and it leading to him influencing his community to want to change and to be better, to see what the real problem is. That's powerful. I can rock with that. And in all honesty, it really just gives the simple equation for what you get for a lot of I guess you could say familiar black movies, right? And so it really played on that, but putting that in that time period. And again, if they did all of that without bringing Jesus into it or the disciples, we would have had a great movie. One of the other things that I honestly think that they did really well and I found to be interesting was it's funny because it just made me laugh. I have to admit it. This was one moment that made me laugh. So they did play on having Judas Iscariot and the 12 disciples, etc. They played on Judas's betrayal, and one of the scenes that they portrayed was Jesus, of course, says, as they're giving this image of the Last Supper, Jesus says, the one that will dip his bread in the gravy will be the one to betray me. And so everyone freezes. Like it's like a time stop moment. The only one struggling not to move is Judas, because Judas doesn't want to move. Judas says, I don't want the bread. I hate Mary Magdalene's cooking. It tastes like garlic. And then he takes the bread. He's still shaking. He dips it in the gravy and he eats it. And you just see him go, oh, so good. It's the gravy. It's the gravy. But now, of course, they know who the betrayer is. And I thought that little moment, just a moment, and I literally mean just a moment, that was funny. So let's go ahead and get into the biggest of problems that we have from this movie. And first and foremost is going to be Clarence's relationship to his brother. Turns out what they decided to use for this movie was that Clarence's brother is Thomas. Yes, doubting Thomas. Yes, the disciple Thomas is the twin brother to Clarence. And so what they started to do with this was they used this to be like, Thomas leaves home, mom is on her deathbed, and Thomas just leaves mom, doesn't do anything for mom, doesn't make sure mom's taken care of, doesn't make sure mom's healed. It's not like he's sending money to provide for mom. So they paint this picture of this corrupt perspective on Thomas, and on some level with the other disciples, being that they used him as the twin and that being the reason. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not to say that the disciples are perfect, right? The disciples had issues. The scriptures don't hesitate to portray those things. But one of the things that makes that frustrating, where it's just like, you left mom to die, you left mom being sick, this, that, and the third. Did not Jesus heal the sick and dying mother of Peter? So it's not out of the purview for Jesus to be willing to heal one of his other disciples when he's calling them from their illness. So it didn't make sense in one sense that Jesus would be like, I'm gonna heal his mom, but not heal hers, and not heal this mom. Like something about that was just extremely off for me. And even then, it doesn't portray, and I'm gonna clear this up, right? They don't portray that even if Jesus didn't heal the mom, it wasn't given in the perspective of that the mom had faith in Jesus. How she spoke of it was that, well, Thomas is doing his thing, Thomas is living out his purpose, and you just do your thing. Like that's all she really had to say. There was no declaration of faith from the mother in this. Now, let me also clarify this as well. Clarence is an atheist. That even that, I will say, that's not a problem. Right? That's not a problem that for I guess you could say gospel message, if they had done this movie differently, that wouldn't be a problem that Clarence would start out as an atheist. We have so many movies Christians have done portraying a character being an atheist, either that person losing their life and maintaining that atheistic perspective, or that person being converted. Kevin Sorbo played that in God's Not Dead in the first movie for them, and he was an atheist person who was being influenced and impacted by one of his own students sharing the gospel. So for them to even have him as an atheist, that's not offensive, okay? So that's not even a thing. But for them to do that to a disciple where there's not any evidence that that's the case, one, a twin brother, two, that his mother wasn't healed by Jesus, three, that he was unhelpful sibling to his own family. Like, something is so extremely off about that, and it paints a false perspective of the corruption of the sinful nature of the disciples. Some other things that were really frustrating about this narrative was the way that they portrayed Jesus's healing practices, right? So here's what I mean by that. When Jesus is, of course, healing, a lot of times what we see him just lay hands on someone. He tells this person to rise up. We see him speak to a person who is dead and calls them up out of their sleep, as Jesus sometimes says, with the young lady that was sleeping, with the Lazarus being in the pit. And ironically, there is no situation of demons being cast out. I find that interesting, and I have my own assumptions when it comes to that, but I'll come back to it. But that is the generalized portrayal of Jesus's healings, and other times, and of course, influencing the weather, walking on water, those types of things.
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
We know how those miracles work, or we know how those miracles have been portrayed. But in this movie, they kind of play on miraculous actions in a way that comes off a bit more like the way the world assumes that God's power ought to show itself versus how God has shown himself. For example, they have Jesus in one scene molding clay birds, and he's of course getting ridiculed for it or addressed for making these birds, and then all of a sudden he makes the birds alive after molding them into clay. First things first, the Bible is not specific on how birds and other animals were constructed and created. They are not illustrated as ones that were formulated from the dust of the earth. That was only a claim done towards man. So that seems to be biblically inconsistent, at least something I would point out. Not only that, the other aspect of that too is you never ever see Jesus do something like that. All of the animals that are to be created have been created, thus there's no need to make more. You don't even hear anything about just making more people because the human population is low. You don't hear anything like that. And so for them to illustrate Jesus' power in that way is a bit foolish in my opinion. Not only that, there was an instance of him going to cast stone, or them going to go and stone Mary Magdalene, because of course she was caught in adultery, sleeping with a Roman, to be more specific. We're gonna get into that too. She was sleeping with a Roman, so they wanted to stone her. But as they went to go throw the stones, Jesus stops them in mid-air. Now, I don't necessarily hate that per se, but with the way in which the gospel illustrates God's interventions in certain things, he's not coming in and just doing this powerful stop moves or anything like that, causing the earth to shake by speaking. He's not doing that to influence the populace to stop what it is that they're doing. He speaks and they cease. And so that's one of the things that I think is a misconception and misillustration of Jesus's powers and abilities. Now, here's the thing. I will levy with you that where Clarence and his friends are obsessed with Jesus's abilities and powers, one, with Clarence not thinking that they're real, and two, thinking that them portraying him in that way, I can understand where it's a misunderstanding on, let's say, the audience's part with what Jesus is capable of and who he is. However, when you take in those scenes to use him to only show that aspect of himself, his miracles and his powers, with minimal word actually being spoken. Now there are moments, and even then those moments are horrible. I will also get to that. But for them to portray Jesus in this light is insulting. It's embarrassing, and that's where we get into blasphemous behaviors, is in them portraying Jesus in this way. Jesus, as a young name by the name of Savvy on TikTok, Jesus is not a magician. Jesus is God. There's a totally different way in which he ought to be represented, and even more so respected. Now there's two more instances of healing that I thought were completely dumb. I know I'm saying a lot, but I think you guys need to understand. I think you guys need to get it, and I think you will. The other instance in this healing was that throughout the whole movie, there is a homeless man covered in dirt. When I say covered, he looks as though he could be black, but it's evident he's just covered in dirt. But Clarence and others have constantly shunned him away, taken his stuff, and he even goes to speak on that later. And what ends up happening for him and him encountering Jesus is Jesus touches him first to make it to where silver just falls from his hands repeatedly. And then Jesus touches him and he's able to now stand upright. And why give him the ability to just produce silver? That makes no sense. That makes no sense at all. I thought that was completely dumb and unnecessary and a misrepresentation of Jesus. Now that man, of course, uses that silver to clean himself up and to go to give unto the people. But because of how he looks and how people were assuming that he might have been a Messiah, where the Romans were looking for fake Messiahs as well as who is claiming to be Messiah, they take him up and they crucify that man too. We'll get into that. The last miracle that was performed that I would like to speak to in this instance, that was Jesus, after Clarence was crucified, he was then resurrected by Jesus. Jesus shows up to remove the stone from his tomb. Jesus shows up to resurrect him. Now, don't get me wrong, Jesus resurrects people. That's in Jesus' purview. It's the conversation that follows that is extremely frustrating. And I will break down that conversation here in just a moment because there's something to really clarify here. Remember the homeless man that was given the hand of silver coins, and then we have Clarence who played as though he was Jesus. The narrative that they did with this that was frustrating. Remember, the Romans wanted to take in the fake messiahs, and of course, Clarence was one of them. And that gentleman happened to be a white guy. There's a lot of racial play in this movie. The white guy, okay, was taken in being assumed to be a messiah. The reason why this is a problem is because in one instance, when Clarence is being brought before the court to be determined, is he a fake messiah, quote unquote, or not, they want to test him. At this point, Clarence is willing to give up doing all the miracles with no profession of faith. Hear me on that. Clarence has not made a profession of faith in God. He has not made a declaration of faith in Jesus. He is apologetic for the things that he had been doing, but he had not turned to Jesus. This is crucial according to the biblical corpus. At some point does he start to recognize God, but he does not recognize Jesus. And so as he's going to be tested, he has to walk across a deep pool of water. Again, no declaration of faith. None. He goes to walk across the water thinking he's going to sink because he can't even swim. He starts walking on water. He's shocked. How am I walking on water? Oh my goodness, right? To play on two things. He has that power within himself, and or Jesus was the one that gave him the power so that he could do that, thus leading to him then being crucified. Now, here's my problem with that. Jesus giving this person, assumably, the ability to walk on water. 2, Jesus giving that man the hand of silver, thus leading to him being crucified, him contributing to these fake messiahs, to give this portrayal almost that Jesus set these people up to be crucified. That's frustrating. That's extremely frustrating. And it's more frustrating even if you want to say, well, God's leading them to want to follow him. No, not like that. Not like that. That's a misuse of, based off of what we see in scripture, a misuse of the function of God's power. Now you can say, well, we see all of these pastors doing this. We see all of these pastors doing that. Obviously, that's why you have so many heresy hunters. That's why you have so many people identifying the difference between the power of the Holy Ghost and simply being witchcraft and sorcery and rebellion. That's why we point these things out. Okay. But for them to play on that in this movie is an insult to how Jesus himself would function. Another thing, I want to hit on the racism thing. Now I want to hit on the crucifixion, and then I promise you I'll be done. The racism thing. The thing that they play on, of course, as they always do in a black movie, is that we constantly are coming at each other's throats when there's actually a looming threat. Is the real people that want to hurt us, and we shouldn't be hurting ourselves. I'm with that. I agree with that. But they over focus on the problem being the Romans and it needing to be a fix of relationship between, the Israelites, between the black characters. Let's fix our relationships, right? I see nothing wrong with that. But the thing is, they're incorporating these behaviors and these practices into the gospel. The relationship between the children of Israel, and Jesus and the disciples when it comes to the Romans. Let me clarify where this is a problem, right? In the Bible, a lot of the centurions and the Romans were believers. They were drawn to Christ. They wanted to worship the Lord. So for them to then portray it as, well, you know, they're just the enemies only, and not seeing God's influence on some of them or on any of them, seems to go against what Scripture is actually portraying. Not only that, one of the things that they did with Judas's betrayal was that they made it a direct contact between Judas and the centurions. That's how they played this. It wasn't that the Pharisees and the Sadducees plotted against Jesus and they were in communication with Judas, and then they went to them to have Jesus judged, bringing Judas in to be that witness against Jesus. They didn't go that way. It was they talked directly to Judas. Judas brought in Jesus. Jesus getting crucified. That's not according to the biblical corpus at all.
False.
That's not according to the biblical corpus. That's completely inconsistent. That is completely inconsistent with the gospel. The people of Israel went against Jesus, but they didn't want to portray that. Why? Because they want to hype up this, we need to elevate the black community and their perspective on themselves, and then them recognize who the real problem is. That's what they wanted to play on. And that is so insulting to the reality of what the gospel is bringing to what took place leading up to Jesus's death and resurrection. That is a lie. Judas spoke with the Pharisees. They were the ones that had animosity against Jesus. The Romans and the centurions really didn't even think about Jesus until the Pharisees and the Sadducees brought this to their table as a problem. They weren't thinking of this. They weren't considering this to be an issue. Pontius Pilate didn't even want to crucify Jesus. He had to question the people. Who do you want me to set free? Barabbas, the murderer, killer, and assaulter? Or Jesus, who's claiming to be the Messiah and shown himself to be so on many occasions? Who wants Jesus? Crucify him. What? Which is another contrast within this movie. You have all these black Israelites loving on Clarence, sad to see Clarence be crucified, but the switch flips when Jesus gets crucified. This has got to be the same audience of people that's going to be there when Jesus is crucified, cheering for Jesus to lose his life. But they were all sorrowful and sad and angry with the Romans when Clarence is losing his life. Something's wrong there. Something's wrong there. And that is where I have a bigger issue. Someone brought this into my TikTok comments. Several people were crucified back then. Several people would cry over their loved ones losing their lives. I absolutely agree. But it wasn't like that for Jesus, right? And here's why I say it wasn't like that for Jesus, is because they tried to make Clarence come across as a Christ figure when Christ is there. It's one thing if this was his own story, own verse, whatever the case may be, and he lost his life, he was a martyr. Makes sense. But you want to give him all the coins and the points of Jesus, having to carry that thing by himself, having to encourage his own people not to try and fight against the Romans, and then him getting up on that cross and having the audacity to say, God forgive them for they know not what they do. Who are you, Clarence, that you have a word in the ear of God? Who are you, Clarence? I've never been more insulted and offended for Christ's name than when watching this movie. That is why that moment frustrated me so much. The reason why this movie, the reason why it's portrayed in this way is to elevate the black community to the status of godhood. To elevate the black community to the status of godhood. Why do I say that? And this is the influence behind my perspective on the movie more than anything, are the words of James Samuel himself. If you were to watch his interview on The Breakfast Club, you will see where he says, peace be with the gods. Gods. Talking about them, the black people that he was there with on The Breakfast Club. Charlemagne the God. Ugh. And then DJ Envy. Peace be with the gods. We're gods. We're gods. We need to see ourselves like this. We need to see ourselves like that. Now, and he even has the audacity to levy that questioning that if you actually read the Bible in this movie wouldn't be a problem for you. Well, no, James Samuel, if you actually read the Bible, you wouldn't have made the movie in the way that you made this movie. Because if you understood the biblical definition of the term when they're talking about God, small g, yes, it's talking about idols in one sense, principalities and rulers in different nations, spiritual entities. the hosts of heaven who sit around the throne of God. When gods are being used in the Old Testament, even getting into the New, gods are judges. People who can rightly judge between good and evil, make wise decisions in that light. And see, that's again what draws me back to, I wonder why he didn't let Jesus cast out demons. I wonder why he didn't portray that the Pharisees and the Sadducees were the ones that were judging, the ones that were working with Judas to come against Jesus. Because when it comes to the demons being cast out, where he had the even using Jesus, I don't even like calling him Jesus, using Jesus when Mary Magdalene was being crucified, which was not biblically accurate in the way that he played it, because he tried to use he without sin cast the first stone in this moment, used incorrectly. They go as far as to then have him talk to this woman and this man, calling this woman a Jezebel. I sat there like, oh, he's gonna cast the spirit out. Nothing. No spirits cast out, because he didn't want there to be any coming against the black community by Jesus. Jesus would have addressed the spirit on that woman. Jesus would have addressed people with words, not just miracles. And then and that goes back to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They're supposed to be gods, righteous judges amongst Israel, but they were unrighteous judges. And because that term is defined as a judge, he didn't want to misrepresent the so-called gods of that time, being the Pharisees and the leaders. So he didn't want to use them in that way. That's my assumption. That's my perspective, because that's the only way that would even make sense. Well, why didn't you do that? You want to elevate black people too much that you're willing to lie. That's what's frustrating. At least with the gospel, they keep telling the truth. They don't tell lies in order to try and communicate their own message. The gospel keeps it real. The gospel keeps it honest. Now I want to play this for you guys, and this is, and with much respect to, what do you mean? Take a listen to what he has to say about James Samuel. This is not to insult him, but it's to really paint the reality of what's actually being attempted to be communicated with this movie. Check it out.
There is a God in yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's super important, man. Like, there's a God in yourself, and that's like the most important thing. But whatever your belief is, even if you have no faith, God is inside you. And I want people to take that away from this movie.
Now, at first, this might not sound too crazy until we understand what he means when he says God. Because all throughout the interview, he frequently mentions not only that God is in him, but also that he is God, just like the other men in the room. Now, if you're confused, it's because these teachings come from a religion called the 5% Nation. And trust me, their beliefs get very bizarre and are all throughout the Book of Clarence, from the big themes even to the minor details. The 5% Nation is a black national religious movement that broke away from the Nation of Islam. The name comes from their belief, among other things, that among people, 10% are enlightened and know the truth and keep 85% of the world in darkness. They claim to be the 5% that's left that's dedicated to enlightening black people to give them truth and justice. Oh, and they also believe that white people are evil devils, that black men are a divine superior race that they call the gods of the earth, that God is black mankind, and a lot more. And these are the elements that are all throughout the movie, even down to the name of the film. If you're wondering why they chose the name Clarence, it's because Clarence 13X happens to be the name of the founder of the 5% Nation movement. This also makes sense of the fact why there's this continuous reference in the movie that knowledge is stronger than belief.
Knowledge is stronger than belief.
Unless the creator is a fan of Schoolhouse Rock,
It's great to learn because knowledge is power.
then it's probably because knowledge is the top virtue in 5%'s teachings. Even more, Jay-Z, who produced the movie, is known for his 5% influence. And James Samuel, the director, repeatedly collaborates musically with 5% rappers as well. Even his greetings throughout his interviews are the standard 5%er phrase, peace to the gods, which we see variants of in this movie.
Peace, good.
Peace to the gods.
James Samuel.
My brother. Peace to the
Welcome.
gods. Peace to the...
Guys, I want to thank you so very much for being patient and listening to me as we review this movie, and me giving my perspective on the movie of the Book of Clarence. Again, it is absolutely the worst movie that I have ever seen, and the only reason why this was filled with spoilers is because I highly recommend that you don't watch this movie. But if you do end up going to see the movie, I hope you keep these points of views in mind and be mindful and be wary of the stuff that you're getting into and what the world is attempting to convince you of that is actually a lie on the gospel of Jesus. I pray that you all have yourselves a blessed day, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Peace.